Today we're going to start the book of Deuteronomy. And my challenge to you is that you'll commit to reading this book every single day until you're done. That you'll watch these videos, but you'll read this book because this is a tremendous book of the Old Testament. Maybe the greatest book in the entire Old Testament. The children of Israel were on the plains of Moab at the Jordan River looking across the Jordan at the Promised Land. 400 years earlier, God had promised them this land, and now they're looking at it again. After 40 years, they're seeing it again. God decides to tell Moses to give them the second law. Deuteronomy means second law, because the first time that they got the law at Mount Sinai, well, a lot of these people weren't even born, and so they need to be reminded of the law. And so that's what Moses is doing in Deuteronomy, he's kind of reminding everybody of what God wanted them to do. And that's so important for us. This book is about reminding, and it's about preparation. This book is quoted by Jesus 3 times when he was tempted by the devil in the wilderness. The first time he says, "Hey, Jesus, why don't you make these stones turn into bread?" And he says, "Man shall not live by bread alone," Deuteronomy 8, verse 3. Then the devil says, "Why don't you demonstrate you're the Messiah? Jump off this cliff and see if the angels will save you." He says, Deuteronomy 6:16, "You shall not tempt the Lord your God." The third temptation was maybe the worst. He says, "You can circumvent the cross. You don't have to go down a cross. If you bow down and worship me, I'll forgive the sins of the world." Like he could even do that. But Deuteronomy 6 verse 13 says, "You shall fear the Lord your God and serve him only." Worship God only. 80 times this book is quoted in the New Testament. And so my challenge to you is to make a commitment that you're going to be reading this book every single day. In Deuteronomy chapter 1, we find that Moses says it's 11 days journey from Mount Horeb or Mount Seir or Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea. They're at Kadesh Barnea. 11 days is all it takes. They could have gone from getting the 10 Commandments to the Promised Land to conquering it in 11 days. It's been 41 years almost. 41 years. They wasted 40 years wandering in the wilderness. Why? Because the last time they were at Kadesh Barnea, they sent 12 spies in and said, "Hey, let's see if this land is good and let's see if we can actually conquer it." God told them it's good. God told them they could conquer it. They didn't need to do that. 10 spies came back with a bad report. 40 years later, they're wandering around the wilderness. What does that tell us? It tells us this. God wants you to operate in faith, not in fear. And this is the reason why a lot of us would say, "Yeah, God has spoken to me about giving a tenth of my income to the Lord, but I just can't get to doing it." And so your finances are a disaster. You don't know where the money goes, but you've never really stepped out in faith and said, "I'm going to, give to God every week," or maybe even automate that giving to where it just happens automatically because you decide you're going to do it. You might be operating in fear in relationships. It could be fear of the future and saying, "I'm just worried all the time." God doesn't want you to operate in fear, and if you do, you're going to waste your life. That is exactly what Israel did. They wasted their lives wandering around doing nothing. Learn from them. Operate in faith. Don't operate in fear any longer. God has a great plan for you, and he will accomplish it, but you got to put your faith in him.